Alright, hey guys, it's Miss Scott with some notes for you about organelles. The purpose of this set of notes is for you to become familiar with the organelles, their functions, what they look like, and where we find them. So let's start talking about organelles with reviewing the levels of organization. Yesterday when we talked about cell theory, we talked about the idea that cells were the basic unit of all living things, that all living things have at least one cell, or they can be made of many cells. So if you're made of many cells, there's this hierarchy, these levels of organization you need to know. Many cells that work together that have the same function make up tissues, and this could be stomach tissue, muscle, etc. Tissues that work together to perform a task makes up an organ. In this case, this tissue makes up the lining of the stomach. Many organs that work together to perform a function necessary for life are called organ systems. So the stomach plus the large intestine, small intestine, liver, etc. make up the digestive system. And lastly, the many organ systems working together form a single organism. So you're an organism made up of many organ systems. Each organ system has lots of organs, which are made of individual tissues, and each tissue is comprised of many cells. So how does an organelle relate to this? Well, an organelle, that word literally translates to little organ, and these are structures that are found within the individual cell. So they're the building blocks of these things. And depending on what kind of cell you are, is going to determine what kind of organelles you have. So let's start with some of the important ones. Again, you do need to know what each of these looks like. This first one is the nucleus. The nucleus is always depicted as a spherical shape or a circle, and often you'll find a real dark center in the middle of it. That represents the nucleolus. We find a nucleus in all cells, not all cells, all eukaryotic cells. So remember you are eukaryotic because we are part of the animal kingdom. Plants would also have this. These are important. This little structure is important because it holds the DNA of the cell. And for that reason, we compare it usually to a control center or headquarters. Remember, your DNA is basically the instructions on how to make you, you. The nucleolus here in the center is a structure that makes ribosomes. And we'll talk about the importance of ribosomes here in a minute. All right, the mitochondria is our next organelle. It looks like, I like to think of it, it's looking like a kidney bean with some squiggles in the middle of it. That's generally how I'll represent it in picture format. And it is the site of cellular respiration. And again, we find this in almost all eukaryotic cells. Cellular respiration, we mentioned it briefly in ecology when we talked about the carbon cycle. It's basically where you take food, sugar, C6H12O6, plus oxygen that you breathe in, is converted to usable energy, otherwise known as ATP. And we'll talk about that more coming up in the unit. Because this is where energy is made in the cell, it's often compared to as a power plant. And when I first learned this stuff many, many years ago in the 7th grade with our science teacher, Mr. Pillsbury, he used to call it the mighty mitochondria, and that just reminded us, mighty mitochondria, power, energy. That's where energy comes from. Now, talking about the mitochondria and its actual physical structure, if you'll note, it has this outer membrane and then this folded inner membrane. This folded inner membrane is really, really vital to its effectiveness at providing energy. Basically, this membrane is where the reactions happen, and because it's folded, you have more surface area, which means you can do more reactions, which means, in this case, more energy, which is huge for living organisms. They want to maximize how much energy they can get because they can't do anything without that energy. Right. The cell membrane is our third structure we'll talk about. Now this is one that's found in eukaryotes and prokaryotes. Basically, if you're a cell, you have a cell membrane. It's made of the phospholipid bilayer, and within this phospholipid bilayer you have embedded proteins, and when we talk about cell transport, we'll see what they do. Basically, this whole structure provides a boundary between the cell's internal and external environment. And it basically controls what goes in and out. And this helps the cell maintain homeostasis. We can compare it to a fence or a gate, allowing certain things in, but keeping other things out. The chloroplast is our next little guy we'll talk about. We generally find these in plant cells. There are some protists, and we'll talk about protists later this year. But they're these little structures. When they're in color diagrams, they will always be depicted as green. There's a reason for that. It's because this is where photosynthesis occurs. This pigment, this green pigment, is basically a protein that helps absorb, or that absorbs light energy from the sun. And it can take carbon dioxide and turn that energy and those inorganic molecules into food. Now, much like the mitochondria, you have these inner membranes that are stacked in the thylakoids, which you can see here, and that increases the surface area. So in this case, with the mitochondria, the increased surface area meant you can make more energy. In this case, with the chloroplast, increased surface area means you can make more food. And this food goes into the mitochondria later for respiration. The ribosomes are our next organelle that you absolutely have to know. In diagrams, they're sometimes represented as just these little dots. Sometimes they'll be attached to other structures like the endoplasmic reticulum. They're found in all cells, both pro and eukaryotic, and they are the site of protein synthesis. And a protein, remember, has many important functions. It basically controls a lot of your body functions. So these little guys, these little ribosomes, help us build those proteins that we need to do all those things. So your instructions are held in the DNA, which is in the nucleus. The proteins turn those instructions into something usable. Alright, the cell wall, another organelle you need to be able to recognize in a diagram. A cell wall is found, now this one's funny because it's found in prokaryotes, so bacteria will have them. And also plant cells, which are eukaryotic, but not in animal cells. So we don't have cell walls, but plants and bacteria do. And this, just like its name implies, it's a wall. It provides structure and protection for the cell from the outside environment. And know that in plants, and I believe we mentioned this with organic compounds, the cell wall is made out of cellulose. So that's a special kind of carbohydrate. Alright, there's some other organelles you should be aware of. But I'm not going to put quite as much emphasis on these, but you should know them. Vacuoles are found in both plant and animal cells, but as you can see in the diagrams, in plant cells they're much larger. This is what helps keep the plant, gives the plant cell its shape. And in both of these, they will store water, food, and waste. The Golgi apparatus, this is a network of tubes that you'll see. It packages and moves materials like proteins that are made by the ribosomes. It will help move them. It'll package them so that they can be moved outside of the cell or within the cell. The lysosome, this word lyse, L-Y-S, like Lysol, means to break down. So this breaks down materials like waste or toxins that are harmful to the cell. And it destroys old organelles that are no longer working so that there's room for new ones. The endoplasmic reticulum, or ER, if you just want to say that to be easier, this is always found, it will be connected to the nucleus. It's a network of tubes that fold, and sort of like the Golgi apparatus, it packages proteins, but this is like its first stop. There's two kinds of ER. Closer to the nucleus, you'll have the rough ER, and the reason it's called rough is because there's ribosomes attached to it. And then later, further out, you have the smooth ER, which does not have ribosomes. But again, just like the Golgi apparatus, it packages stuff and moves it within the cell. Centrioles, we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about cell division. We find these in animal cells, and they help when the cell is dividing, evenly split into two. So with all these organelles, so that wasn't quite all. There's a couple that we didn't mention. Just know that so you're not surprised later. But what I want you to take away from this, in addition to all that information I just said, form and function have a lot to do with one another. Whatever organelle a cell contains, you can infer that that has something to do with the function of that cell. So example, a cell that has a bunch of chloroplasts in it, its job is probably to do photosynthesis because that's what chloroplasts do. If a cell needs a large amount of energy, like let's say like sperm cells, they move, they need lots of energy, they'll have lots of mitochondria. In plants, if it's a cell that is storing something, like let's say water, which is a needed ingredient for photosynthesis, it's going to have large vacuoles. So you can sort of tell what the cell does based on what it has. All you have to do is bridge this gap between, all right, what does the organelle do? What does the organelle do? That will reflect what the cell's job is.